Tim Britton covers them, does a great job in The Athletic. Let's get some thoughts. With the Braves on fire, cutting that big 10.5 game deficit to 2 and a loss. The Mets are 19-16 in the Braves' 29-8 run here. And Timmy, I'm not so sure if I was a Met fan I'd be that worried about it. You know, they were due to cool off a little bit. They've had a million injuries. Obviously, Scherzer and DeGrom. You know, now Marte and McCann. You had to expect them to calm down a little bit. So although they have lost a big part of their lead, if I was a Met fan, I know it's Atlanta, I would not be panicking too much. Let's get your take on that first. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what your perspective is as a Mets fan. You know, sequencing matters to fans. If you told a Mets fan at the start of the season that on July 11th they'd be going to Atlanta with a 1.5 lead in the National League East, despite Jacob DeGrom not making a single start for them, I think everyone would jump on that. But you think about on the morning of June 1st, that lead was 10.5, and it's really not so much the Mets' fault. It's not a Mets collapse here so much as it is the Braves playing just out of their minds for more than a month now. Like you mentioned, 29-8 since the start of June. They've won just about every series since then. So the Mets have held their own. I think the question in terms of panicking, if you're a Mets fan, is you worry about the sustainability of their offensive model. You know, they're going to Atlanta to play a team that scores about the same number of runs per game. The Braves are at 4.78 for the season. The Mets are at 4.76. But they go about it totally different. The Braves have 48 more home runs than the Mets this season. The Mets' offensive approach is more move the line, pass the baton, you know, singles, occasional doubles, kind of. It's more in line with like the 2015 Royals, and we just haven't seen a team with that kind of offensive approach have the kind of success the Mets had in April and May. When it really worked for them, it hasn't worked as much in June and July.
Yeah, good point. Now, Atlanta, a lot of their great, listen, they're very good, don't get me wrong, but boy, they have played a lot of Nationals, a lot of Rockies, a lot of Arizona. They played Oakland. I mean, you know, they have played some, they actually lost the one series to the Cubs. They haven't played a lot of quality opponents. I don't think that's that big a deal. They also lost to the Dodgers 2 out of 3, too. So they've lost a couple series. But, I mean, listen, they are going to be there at the end. I do think the Mets, Timmy, could use another bat. You know, they don't get a ton of production out of their catching spot. You know, their DH is what it is. Canna's a good player, but, you know, not a huge player. Escobar hasn't hit a lot. You know, they're good, you know, and, you know, Lindor's very up. He's got a lot of RBIs, but he's very up and down. Mcneill's good. You get the point. They could use another big bopper in the middle of that lineup. Let's get your take on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, the number 5 spot in the order has kind of been a revolving door for them since the start of the season. You know, Alonso and Lindor and Alonso in the 3-4 spots have been the anchors of the lineup. In particular, Alonso in a lineup that doesn't have a lot of power. He's the guy who can change the game with one swing every time he comes to the plate. With the number 5 spot, it started with Eduardo Escobar, a guy who's hit, you know, who has 25 to 30 home run power, but hasn't shown it this year and isn't hitting for average either at this point. So has really struggled at third base for them. Jeff McNeil has done well offensively. He's been hitting 5th lately, but is not your kind of prototypical 5th place hitter who's going to knock the ball out of the ballpark. So, you know, you talk about the opening at DH, which really means there's an opening for any bat. You know, you can fit anyone who plays any position into that spot for them. But a guy like Josh Bell in Washington, they've talked about Trey Mancini in Baltimore, and the Orioles might be in the playoff race now themselves. Those are the kinds of names you would think about, you know, to give some protection to Alonso and to add, you know, another 25, 30 home run power potential guy to a lineup that lacks in that department.
The one thing I do like about the Mets, Timmy, is the idea they got a little karma. I mean, Saturday night is a perfect example. They had no business winning that game. The third baseman of the Marlins made an atrocious defensive play, bad base running. I mean, just very poor, that loss that Miami had. That's the kind of win. The game they had against Cincinnati, I know the Reds are terrible, but the Reds came out and swept Tampa, so they, you know, had a good weekend. But the game they had in Cincinnati in the 9th inning with the tie scenario against Strickland with the ball down the left field line, they do have a lot of karma. And, you know, I do think there's a lot to that. It really began at the beginning of the year, and it's still carried over despite 19-16 in their last 35. Let's get your thoughts on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you can call it karma. I can call it taking advantage of other teams' mistakes. There's a lot of bad baseball being played in the major leagues at various times over the course of the season. You know, there are a lot of teams that are kind of out of it from the start of the season. The Mets have exploited those teams' mistakes throughout this season. They've been on top. You know, a team makes an error, gives them a 4th out in an inning, they take advantage. A team, you know, like the Marlins did on Saturday, like the Reds did on Wednesday night, where they got to the the bottom part of that bullpen in the 10th inning and exploded for 5 runs. They're good enough all around that they're able to take advantage of other teams' mistakes on a consistent basis. And they've really, every team talks about battling for 27 outs. The Mets have really done that over the course of the season. They've got several late game wins. The one in Philadelphia where they came back from down 7-1 in the 9th inning really sticks out. But once you start to get those kinds of wins, it makes it easier to believe you're capable of them. And that has snowballed in a good way for the Mets so far this season.
100%. I know Diaz has been wonderful. Are you okay with the Mets' 7th and 8th inning down the road here?
It really depends on what they're going to get out of Trevor May, who's due back shortly after the All-Star break. He's kind of the guy who was penciled into that 8th inning role, but has been out since the start of May. Drew Smith was really a revelation early in the season, didn't give up a run until the middle of May, but he's a guy who hasn't thrown more than 40 innings in the major leagues before, and hasn't thrown more than 50 in a season since 2017. So he's coming up on those limits already, and has struggled with the home run ball a little bit of late. So I think the bullpen is another area, whether it's a late game arm that you can trust in the 7th or 8th inning, or just a left-handed arm to join Joely Rodriguez down there, is probably another priority at the deadline.
DeGrom is a significant factor. 2 rehab starts so far. How many more? When do we expect to see him in a rotation? I know he's throwing 100 miles an hour, and, you got to think he'll start off well. When do you think we'll see DeGrom as far as the Mets on the mound in a big game? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so his next rehab start is going to be this week at AAA. The first 2 were in Single A in the Florida State League. This one will be AAA Syracuse on Wednesday or Thursday of this week. And then it's going to be a little bit tricky for the Mets because every affiliate is on an all-star break next week. And so there's no minor league game for him to pitch in 5 days from his next start. He probably needs one more after that. So whether that's a sim game at the complex in Florida, whether they figure out some way for him to face batters next week, and then after that, it's either a big league start, maybe that first weekend back from the All-Star break when San Diego is in town, or he gets one more rehab start that weekend and comes back, whether it's for the Yankees midweek or that series in Miami just before the trade deadline.
Are you convinced that when he does come back, we'll get 10, 12 starts out of him and see him in the postseason? Or is he a start-by-start guy right now with his history of injuries?
I don't know how anyone can be convinced that he's going to give him 10 or 12 starts at this point, given the way the last 2 seasons have gone for him. Even when he was pitching healthy, in quotes, last season at the start of the year, he was leaving some starts early with some different aggravations. So I think you've got to see him post for 5, 6 starts in a row before you really start to feel confident that he's going to be there for the duration of the rest of the season.
All right, and the Mets scenario with the Braves here. Do you think the Braves, I've wondered if the Mets inwardly, in their constitution, and being in New York, basically, this has been ingrained in me because every time I go head-to-head with the Braves, I never win. But do you think this group, with Buck running it, do you think they realize, and if they go toe-to-toe to Atlanta to win the division, do you think they have it in them to do so?
I mean, I think DeGrom is the huge X factor, obviously. So obvious it's not really an X factor. You look at the rosters as they're currently constructed, you probably like Atlanta's a little bit more for the rest of the season, the way they've played of late, the way they've played since Acuna and Michael Harris second joined the lineup. So getting DeGrom back and having him as part of your rotation, making the switch from Trevor Williams or David Peterson to Jacob DeGrom is as big an upgrade as any team is going to make in the month of July. If the Mets get a healthy Jacob DeGrom, who's pitching the way he's pitched really since 2018, then it's hard not to like them in this division.
And I love the way they handled on Saturday with Keith. I'm a big Hernandez guy. Now, I don't know if I consider him a Hall of Famer. He's more of an intangible quality to him from a Hall of Fame perspective. But, boy, I understand why. And I'm usually not one who loves all these numbers retired for these local teams, but I get him. His brother was a big star there, Gary. I love that. The Mets handled it well. Mr. Cohen handled it well. I love what I saw there on Saturday. The 50,000, Howie, the whole bit. The Mets did that first rate. What's your take on that for a sec? Let me hear.
Yeah, I loved all the little details the Mets nailed with that. This is a franchise that hasn't always nailed moments like that. And often these things take place later than they should, like the unveiling of the Tom Seaver statue earlier this year. But, to give Keith a mosaic picture of himself made out of baseball cards and Stratomatic cards for a guy who loves Stratomatic, I thought was really a chef's kiss moment for the franchise. They really handled everything properly for him. They flew his whole family in. They had some teammates from the 80s with him. The first guy from really the best era in Mets history in the 1980s to have his number retired. It was a great day for the Mets and their entire history on Saturday.
Yeah, it really was. Great job out of you, Tim. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for a few minutes here today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, anytime. Thanks for having me.